The morning started like any other Tuesday at Windsor Castle. Guard Thomas Mitchell adjusted his red uniform jacket and checked his watch for the 100th time. 6 hours into his shift, and the day had already thrown him more challenges than he expected. The weather forecast had promised sunshine, but the dark clouds gathering overhead told a different story. Thomas had been a palace guard for 12 years. He knew the routine by heart. Stand straight, look ahead, protect the royal family, and never break character no matter what happened around him. He had seen it all during his time on duty. Tourists trying to make him laugh, children waving excitedly, photographers snapping pictures from every angle. But today felt different somehow. The first drops of rain began to fall around noon. Light at first, barely noticeable on his thick wool uniform. Thomas remained perfectly still at his post by the main entrance, his tall black hat steady despite the increasing wind. The tourists who had been gathering around the castle gates started opening umbrellas and pulling on raincoats. Some hurried toward the gift shop for shelter. As the rain grew heavier, Thomas could feel the water seeping through his jacket. His leather boots, polished to perfection that morning, were starting to show water spots. The metal buckles on his uniform grew cold against his chest. Still, he didn't move. Palace guards were trained to handle any weather condition. Rain, snow, blazing sun, or bitter cold. They remained at their posts. The castle grounds were buzzing with activity despite the weather. Staff members rushed, between buildings holding folders and clipboards over their heads. Gardeners quickly moved potted plants under covered areas. The flag on the main tower whipped violently in the wind, signaling that the Queen was in residence. Thomas watched from the corner of his eye as a group of school children on a field trip gathered near the gates. Their teacher was trying to keep them together while juggling an umbrella and a clipboard. The children pressed their faces against the iron bars, pointing at Thomas and whispering excitedly to each other. One little boy with curly hair kept waving, hoping to get the guards' attention. The rain was coming down steadily now, creating small rivers along the cobblestone pathways. Thomas could feel his uniform getting heavier as it absorbed the water. His hat, designed to shed rain, was doing its job, but water was starting to drip from the brim onto his shoulders. The leather strap under his chin felt tight and uncomfortable as it swelled from the moisture. Inside the castle, staff members occasionally peered out through the windows. Thomas could see their concerned faces looking in his direction. He knew they were probably wondering how long he could stand out there in the rain. But this was his job, his duty. He had sworn an oath to protect the royal family and maintain his post regardless of personal comfort. The afternoon shift change wasn't scheduled for another 3 hours. Thomas calculated that he would need to endure at least that much more rain, possibly longer if his replacement was delayed by the weather. He had been through worse conditions during his military training before joining the palace guard. This was just water, after all. A delivery truck pulled up to the side entrance, splashing through a large puddle. The driver jumped out, quickly, grabbed several boxes from the back and ran toward the castle doors. Even he was getting soaked in the few seconds it took to make the delivery. Thomas envied the man's ability to move freely, to seek shelter when needed. The tourists were thinning out now. Most had decided that castle viewing wasn't worth getting drenched. A few dedicated photographers remained, their expensive cameras protected by plastic covers, still hoping to capture the perfect shot of the stoic guard standing firm against the elements. Thomas had become something of a symbol, the unwavering protector who wouldn't abandon his post for anything. As the rain continued to fall, Thomas began to notice small details he hadn't paid attention to before. The way the water collected in the grooves of the cobblestones, how the ancient castle walls seemed to darken and become more imposing in the gray light. The sound of his own breathing, slightly heavier now as his body worked to stay warm in the wet uniform. A member of the castle staff approached the main entrance from inside. Through the glass doors, Thomas could see him speaking on a radio, probably updating someone about the weather conditions and the guard situation. The man looked out at Thomas with obvious concern, shook his head and walked away. Thomas knew that protocol prevented anyone from offering him shelter or relief unless there was a genuine emergency. The rain showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. Thomas could feel water starting to pool in his boots. His socks were completely soaked now, making every step slightly uncomfortable when he made his small regulation movements to maintain circulation. The cold was beginning to seep through his layers of clothing. In the distance, Thomas could hear the sound of car engines and voices. Even on a rainy day like this, the castle remained busy with official business. Meetings were still being held, staff was still working, and life inside the ancient walls continued as usual. The weather was just another obstacle to work around, not a reason to stop the important work of the monarchy. Thunder rumbled overhead, and Thomas knew the worst was yet to come. This wasn't just a passing shower, it was turning into a proper storm. He squared his shoulders, took a deep breath, and prepared himself for whatever the afternoon would bring. After 12 years of service, he wasn't about to let a little rain defeat him. His dedication to duty was stronger than any weather condition nature could throw at him. The rain kept falling, and Thomas Mitchell kept standing guard, unaware that his display of unwavering commitment was about to catch the attention of someone very special who was watching from inside the castle walls. The storm was getting worse by the minute. What had started as light rain was now a proper downpour, with wind whipping across the castle grounds. Thomas felt every drop as it hit his face and ran down his neck. His uniform, once pristine and perfectly pressed, was now completely soaked through. The red fabric had darkened to a deep burgundy, and he could feel the weight of the water in every fiber. 2 hours had passed since the rain began. Thomas's feet were starting to go numb inside his waterlogged boots. He could no longer feel his toes properly, and each small movement sent a chill through his legs. The cold was creeping up his body, making his muscles tense and his jaw clenched to stop his teeth from chattering. Still, he maintained his perfect posture, eyes fixed straight ahead. From one of the upper windows of the castle, a small face appeared and disappeared quickly. Thomas caught the movement in his peripheral vision but couldn't turn to look directly. Palace protocol was strict. Guards were not to break their stance or acknowledge observers unless specifically addressed by a member of the royal family or senior staff. He wondered if it was one of the young princes or Princess Charlotte, curious about the guard standing in the rain. The window opened slightly, and he could hear muffled voices from inside. A woman's voice, gentle but concerned, was speaking to someone. Then a younger voice, higher and more insistent, seemed to be asking questions. Thomas couldn't make out the words over the sound of the rain hitting the cobblestones and the wind whistling around the castle walls. A group of castle staff members had gathered in the main hallway, visible through the large glass doors. They were clearly discussing the situation, gesturing toward Thomas and checking their watches. He could see the concern on their faces, but he also knew they were bound by the same protocols that kept him at his post. Palace guards had a reputation to maintain, and showing weakness in the face of bad weather wasn't acceptable. The rain was now coming down in sheets, creating a curtain of water that made it difficult to see beyond a few yards. The castle grounds were almost deserted except for the essential staff who had to be outside. Even the usually persistent tourists had given up and sought shelter in nearby shops and cafes. Thomas was alone in his commitment to duty, a solitary figure standing against the storm. His uniform jacket was so wet now that water was dripping steadily from the bottom hem. The brass buttons, usually gleaming, were dulled by the constant stream of water running over them. His leather belt was starting to stretch from the moisture, and he had to adjust his stance slightly to accommodate the change. Every piece of his carefully maintained equipment was suffering in the relentless rain. The thunder was getting closer, and with each rumble, Thomas could see flashes of lightning reflecting off the wet castle walls. The storm was directly overhead now, and he knew it would probably get worse before it got better. He had checked the weather that morning, but the forecast had been completely wrong. What was supposed to be a partly cloudy day had turned into one of the worst storms he had experienced while on duty. Inside the castle, more faces appeared at various windows. Thomas could sense the growing concern among the staff and residents. He had become something of a spectacle, though not by choice. People were watching him, talking about him, worrying about him, but nobody could do anything without breaking protocol. The royal household operated on centuries-old traditions, and those traditions didn't bend easily for weather. A maintenance worker ran across the courtyard, hunched over against the rain, carrying what looked like emergency supplies. He glanced at Thomas as he passed, shaking his head in what seemed like admiration mixed with disbelief. The man ducked into a service entrance, probably grateful to be out of the storm. Thomas envied that simple ability to seek shelter when needed. The cold was becoming serious now. Thomas could feel his body temperature dropping, and he had to work harder to maintain his steady breathing. His hands gripping his ceremonial weapon were stiff and aching. The metal was ice cold against his palms, and he could barely feel his fingers. He knew he needed to keep moving his toes inside his boots to maintain circulation. But even those small movements were becoming difficult. From somewhere inside the castle came the sound of running footsteps. Thomas could hear voices getting louder, more urgent. Someone was clearly making a decision about something, and he suspected it might be related to his situation. The concern in the voices was evident even through the walls and the noise of the storm. The rain showed no mercy. If anything, it seemed to be intensifying. Thomas could see water rushing down the gutters and creating small floods in the lower areas of the courtyard. The ancient drainage systems of the castle were being tested by the sheer volume of water falling from the sky. Centuries-old stone was holding up well, but the modern world outside the walls was struggling with the unexpected deluge. A news van pulled up outside the gates, and Thomas realized that his situation was probably attracting media attention. Standing in the rain for hours wasn't unusual for palace guards, but this storm was exceptional. The reporters would likely want to make a story out of his dedication to duty, perhaps comparing him to the famous guards who never moved no matter what happened around them. Through the rain-streaked windows of the castle, Thomas could see more activity. Staff members were moving with purpose, and there seemed to be some kind of meeting or discussion taking place. He wondered if they were considering calling for an early shift change or implementing some kind of emergency protocol. But deep down he knew that wasn't likely. Palace guards were expected to endure, and endure he would. The wind picked up even more, and Thomas had to brace himself against its force. His tall ceremonial hat was being tested by the gusts, but it stayed firmly in place thanks to the chin strap. His uniform cape, designed more for ceremony than weather protection, whipped around his legs. Every part of his outfit was now working against him rather than for him, but he refused to show any sign of discomfort. Somewhere in the distance, he could hear the sound of children's laughter, quickly hushed by adult voices. The royal family was still going about their daily activities inside the warm, dry castle, probably looking out occasionally at the guard who stood faithfully in the storm. Thomas took pride in knowing that his presence allowed them to feel secure, even in the worst weather. His discomfort was a small price to pay for their peace of mind. The storm had been raging for nearly 4 hours now, and Thomas was beginning to feel the true effects of prolonged exposure to the cold rain. His body was fighting to maintain its core temperature, but the battle was becoming more difficult with each passing minute. His lips had lost all color, and his hands were so cold that he could barely feel them gripping his ceremonial rifle. Despite this, his training kicked in, and he continued to stand at perfect attention. Inside Windsor Castle, the concern was growing. Staff members had been monitoring the weather and the guards' condition from various windows throughout the afternoon. The head of palace security had been in constant communication with his superiors, discussing whether emergency protocols should be activated. However, the tradition of the palace guard's unwavering dedication was not something to be taken lightly or abandoned easily. Princess Charlotte, who was only 10 years old at the time, had been watching the guard from her bedroom window for the past hour. She had noticed how the man in the red uniform never moved, never sought shelter, never even wiped the rain from his face. Her nanny had explained that the guards were very brave people, whose job was to protect the royal family no matter what happened with the weather. But he must be so cold and wet, Charlotte had said, pressing her small hand against the window glass. Can't someone bring him inside? Her nanny had patiently explained the traditions and protocols, but Charlotte couldn't stop thinking about the guard. She had seen many guards during her life at the castle, but she had never seen one standing in such terrible weather for so long. The rain was coming down harder than she had ever seen, and the wind was so strong that it was bending the trees in the castle gardens. Thomas, meanwhile, was focusing on small goals to get through each minute. First, he would concentrate on keeping his breathing steady. Then he would focus on maintaining his posture. After that, he would think about keeping his feet properly positioned. Breaking down his duty into tiny, manageable pieces, helped him cope with the overwhelming discomfort of his situation. The media attention outside the gates was growing. Several news crews had arrived, and photographers with long-lens cameras were trying to capture images of the dedicated guard. Social media was starting to buzz with posts about the heroic palace guard, who refused to abandon his post despite the severe storm. Thomas was unaware of his growing fame, focused entirely on doing his job. From the kitchen windows, the castle's cooking staff watched with growing admiration and concern. The head chef, a man who had worked at the castle for 25 years, shook his head as he watched the guard standing motionless in the downpour. He had prepared hot soup and tea, hoping that someone would be able to offer it to the guard, but protocol prevented such gestures. Princess Charlotte made a decision that would surprise everyone. She had been thinking about the guard for over an hour, and she couldn't bear to watch him suffer any longer. Despite being told about protocols and traditions, her young heart was moved by simple human compassion. She announced to her nanny that she wanted to help the guard. "Your Royal Highness," the nanny said gently. "The guards are trained for this. It's their job, and they're very proud of their ability to handle difficult conditions." "But it's just not fair," Charlotte replied with the straightforward logic that only children possess. "He's protecting us, so we should protect him too." The princess had an idea. She remembered the large umbrellas that were kept in the entrance hall for rainy days. Surely, she thought, there would be nothing wrong with simply offering some protection from the rain. It wasn't the same as asking the guard to abandon his post or break protocol. It was just being kind to someone who was suffering. Thomas noticed increased activity inside the castle. More faces appeared at windows, and there seemed to be some kind of discussion or debate taking place. He could see gestures and pointing, and he suspected he was the subject of the conversation. The concern on people's faces was evident even through the rain-streaked glass. His uniform was now completely saturated. Water had found its way through every seam and gap in his clothing. His undershirt was plastered to his skin, and his socks squelched with every tiny movement inside his boots. The leather of his belt and boots was darkened and starting to stretch from the constant moisture. His ceremonial sword hung heavy at his side, its metal components cold against his leg. The wind was creating small whirlpools of leaves and debris around Thomas's feet. The storm drain near his post was overflowing, creating a small river that ran past his boots. He had to be careful not to slip on the wet cobblestones while maintaining his rigid stance. Every muscle in his body was tense from the cold and the effort of staying perfectly still. Princess Charlotte was now in the main hallway of the castle, holding a large black umbrella. Her nanny and a security officer were trying to convince her that approaching the guard wasn't appropriate, but Charlotte was determined. She had made up her mind that someone needed to help the man who was working so hard to keep her family safe. "I'm not going to ask him to move or talk," she explained patiently to the adults. "I just want to keep the rain off him. He's doing his job, and I want to help him do it better." The discussion in the hallway was attracting attention from other staff members. The princess's simple act of kindness was creating a dilemma for the adults around her. On one hand, protocol clearly stated that guards should not be approached or assisted while on duty. On the other hand, how could they explain to a 10-year-old princess that her compassionate impulse was wrong? Thomas was starting to shiver now, though he tried to control it. The involuntary muscle movements were small, but they were there. His body was doing everything it could to generate warmth, but the cold, wet conditions were overwhelming his natural defenses. He knew that hypothermia was a real concern if he remained in these conditions much longer, but his duty came first. The storm showed no signs of letting up. Weather reports on the radio inside the castle were predicting several more hours of heavy rain and wind. The temperature was dropping as evening approached, which would make Thomas's situation even more challenging. Time was becoming a critical factor in his endurance test. Princess Charlotte had found an ally in her mission. One of the younger staff members, moved by her determination to help the guard, quietly supported her plan. Together they approached the main entrance, umbrella in hand, ready to show that sometimes the most important protocols are those written in the heart, rather than in rule books. The heavy wooden doors of Windsor Castle creaked open, and Thomas felt a slight change in the air pressure around him. His peripheral vision caught movement, but his training kept him looking straight ahead. He had been standing in the rain for over 4 hours now, and his body was operating on pure determination and muscle memory. The cold had settled deep into his bones, making every breath an effort and every heartbeat a small victory against the elements. Princess Charlotte stepped out into the storm, immediately feeling the full force of the wind and rain that Thomas had been enduring. The umbrella in her small hands was instantly tested by the weather, threatening to turn inside out or blow away entirely. She held it tightly with both hands, her face showing determination mixed with shock at the intensity of the storm she was walking into. Behind her, several staff members had gathered at the doorway. The head of security was speaking rapidly into his radio, probably alerting his superiors about the unexpected development. The princess's nanny stood wringing her hands, torn between following protocol and supporting the young royal's compassionate mission. Other staff members whispered among themselves, some smiling at Charlotte's determination, others worried about the breach in tradition. Thomas could hear footsteps approaching through the rain, but he remained perfectly still. His training had prepared him for all kinds of distractions and disruptions. Tourists often tried to get his attention. Photographers attempted to provoke reactions, and sometimes even other officials needed to speak with him. But this felt different. The footsteps were lighter, more hesitant, and there was something about the energy of the approaching person that seemed unusual. Princess Charlotte walked carefully across the wet cobblestones, her small shoes struggling for grip on the slippery surface. The umbrella was heavy in her hands, and the wind kept trying to tear it away from her. Rain immediately began soaking through her jacket, and she understood for the first time just how miserable the guard must have been feeling. Her respect for his dedication grew with every step she took through the storm. The princess positioned herself slightly to the side and behind Thomas, holding the umbrella high to provide as much coverage as possible. She was too short to cover him completely, but she managed to shield his head and shoulders from the worst of the downpour. For the first time in hours, Thomas felt the drumming of raindrops on his ceremonial hat decrease significantly. "I hope this helps a little," Princess Charlotte said quietly, her young voice barely audible over the wind and rain. She had to speak up to be heard, but she tried to keep her tone respectful and gentle. "You've been standing out here for such a long time. I thought you might like to have some of the rain blocked." Thomas felt a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. In all his years of service, no member of the royal family had ever approached him during his duty to offer personal assistance. He was trained to protect them, not the other way around. The gesture was so unexpected and so genuinely kind that he felt emotions rising in his throat. He remained at attention, but inside he was deeply moved by the princess's compassion. The umbrella made an immediate difference. While Thomas was still soaked to the skin from hours of rain, the relief from the constant battering of new raindrops was significant. He could feel some of the tension leave his shoulders as they were no longer being pelted by the heavy drops. His hat, which had been channeling streams of water down his back, was now staying relatively dry. Princess Charlotte adjusted her position several times, trying to find the best angle to protect the guard while staying stable on the wet ground. Her arms were already getting tired from holding the large umbrella against the wind, but she was determined to maintain her position. She planted her feet carefully and used both hands to keep the umbrella steady. Inside the castle, word of the princess's actions was spreading quickly. Staff members were gathering at windows to witness the extraordinary scene. Some were taking photos with their phones, recognizing that they were witnessing a moment that perfectly captured the princess's character. Others were calling their supervisors, unsure how to handle this unprecedented situation. The head of palace security was in a difficult position. Protocol dictated that he should escort the princess back inside immediately. Royal family members were not supposed to expose themselves to severe weather conditions, especially not to assist staff members who were trained to handle such situations. But he also recognized the genuine kindness of the gesture and the positive impact it was having on everyone who witnessed it. Thomas could smell the faint scent of Princess Charlotte's shampoo or perfume, a stark contrast to the wet stone and metal smells that had surrounded him for hours. Her presence brought a touch of warmth and humanity to his cold, duty-focused world. He realized that she was getting just as wet as he had been, standing out in the storm to help him, and this made her gesture even more meaningful. "My nanny told me that you're not supposed to talk or move while you're on duty," Charlotte continued, raising her voice slightly to be heard over the storm. "So you don't have to say anything back. I just wanted you to know that I think you're very brave for standing out here for so long. My whole family thinks you're doing an amazing job." The princess's words reached Thomas's heart in a way that no official commendation ever had. Recognition from supervisors and medals for service were important, but hearing a genuine expression of gratitude from the young person he was sworn to protect made all his years of training and dedication feel worthwhile. He blinked away rainwater that might not have been entirely from the storm. Charlotte struggled to keep the umbrella positioned correctly as the wind picked up again. Her arms were shaking from the effort and she was getting thoroughly soaked herself, but she was determined to maintain her post just as steadfastly as Thomas was maintaining his. She understood in her own way that they were both doing their duty now, his to protect and hers to show kindness. A photographer outside the castle gates had noticed the unusual scene and was trying to capture images through the rain and wind. The picture of the young princess holding an umbrella over the stoic guard would later become one of the most iconic images of her childhood, perfectly encapsulating her natural empathy and the connection between the royal family and those who serve them. The storm continued to rage around them, but under the umbrella, there was a small island of shared purpose. Thomas remained at perfect attention, doing his job with unwavering dedication. Princess Charlotte stood behind him, her small arms straining against the wind, doing her job of showing that kindness and protocol could coexist. Together, they created a scene that would be remembered and talked about for years to come, a perfect example of duty and compassion, working hand in hand. 20 minutes had passed since Princess Charlotte had taken her position behind Thomas with the umbrella, and the strain was beginning to show on her small frame. Her arms were trembling from holding the heavy umbrella against the persistent wind, and her clothes were now as soaked as the guards had been. Despite her discomfort, she remained determined to continue providing what relief she could. Thomas was acutely aware of the princess's struggle behind him. He could hear her quiet breathing becoming more labored as she fought to maintain her position. Occasionally, he felt the umbrella waver slightly as her arms grew tired, but she always managed to readjust and restore the coverage. Her dedication to helping him was as impressive as any display of military discipline he had ever witnessed. The scene outside the castle gates had attracted a growing crowd despite the terrible weather. Word had spread on social media about the princess helping the guard, and people were braving the storm to witness the heartwarming display. News crews were setting up equipment under temporary shelters, trying to capture the story while protecting their gear from the rain. Inside the castle, a heated discussion was taking place. Senior staff members were debating whether to intervene and bring the princess inside. Some argued that protocol demanded immediate action to protect the young royal from the weather. Others contended that her gesture was so pure and meaningful that interrupting it would send the wrong message about the values the royal family represented. Princess Charlotte's legs were beginning to ache from standing in one position for so long. She had never realized how difficult it was to remain perfectly still for extended periods. The guard made it look effortless, but she was discovering that it required tremendous physical and mental strength. Her respect for Thomas's endurance grew with every passing minute. "Are you feeling any warmer?" Charlotte asked softly, having to speak louder as the wind picked up again. "I know the umbrella can't fix everything, but I hope it's helping at least a little bit. My arms are getting pretty tired, but I can keep going for as long as you need me to." Thomas felt a profound sense of responsibility toward the young princess. Here was a child who was supposed to be protected and cared for, and instead she was standing in a dangerous storm trying to take care of him. The irony wasn't lost on him, and it made him even more determined to maintain his professional composure despite the emotional impact of her kindness. The umbrella was providing significant relief, but Thomas was still concerned about Princess Charlotte's exposure to the elements. Her voice sounded different now. He could hear the cold affecting her speech, and he suspected she was starting to shiver. The thought that she might become ill because of her efforts to help him was troubling. A senior palace official finally made the decision to approach them. He walked carefully across the wet courtyard, his own umbrella fighting against the wind. Thomas recognized the footsteps of the deputy master of the household, a man who had worked at the castle for over 30 years and understood both protocol and the human heart. "Your Royal Highness," the official said gently as he approached, "perhaps we should get you back inside where it's warm and dry. You've shown wonderful kindness to our guard, but we're concerned about your health in this weather." Princess Charlotte turned slightly to acknowledge the official but didn't lower her umbrella. I'm fine, thank you. I know I'm getting wet, but so has he been getting wet for hours and hours. I just want to help him do his job better. Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Help the people who work so hard to take care of us? The deputy master found himself in the unusual position of being lectured on royal duty by a 10-year-old, and he had to admit that her logic was sound. The princess was demonstrating exactly the kind of service and compassion that the monarchy was supposed to represent. Her actions were teaching everyone present a lesson about leadership and empathy. Thomas listened to the exchange with growing admiration for Princess Charlotte's character. Even when given an easy opportunity to return to comfort and warmth, she chose to continue helping him. Her commitment to her self-appointed mission was unwavering, matching his own dedication to his official duties. The storm was finally beginning to show signs of weakening. The rain, while still heavy, wasn't coming down with quite the same intensity as before. The wind was still strong, but the umbrella wasn't being torn from Charlotte's hands with every gust. Both she and Thomas could sense that the worst of the weather was starting to pass. News of the princess's actions had reached the highest levels of the royal household. Phone calls were being made, and discussions were happening in offices throughout the castle. The story was already spreading beyond the castle walls, with social media posts praising both the guard's dedication and the princess's compassion going viral around the world. Princess Charlotte shifted her weight from one foot to the other, trying to relieve the ache in her legs and back. The cobblestones were hard and uneven, making it difficult to find a comfortable stance. She was beginning to understand why palace guards underwent such rigorous physical training. Standing perfectly still for long periods was much more challenging than it appeared. "I think the rain is getting a little lighter," Charlotte observed, speaking more to encourage Thomas than because she believed the improvement was significant. "Maybe the storm is finally starting to move away. You've done such an amazing job standing out here through all of this. I'm really proud to know someone as dedicated as you." Her words warmed Thomas more than any hot beverage could have. Throughout his career, he had received formal recognition and professional praise, but the sincere appreciation of the young person he was sworn to protect touched him in a completely different way. Her presence reminded him of why his job mattered and who he was ultimately serving. The deputy master had retreated slightly but remained nearby, torn between his duty to protect the princess and his recognition of the profound meaning of what she was doing. He had witnessed many moments of royal protocol and ceremony during his career, but none had moved him quite like this simple act of human kindness playing out in the rain. As the minutes ticked by, both Thomas and Princess Charlotte settled into their shared vigil. The guard maintained his perfect military bearing, while the princess continued her determined effort to shield him from the worst of the storm. Together, they created a powerful image of mutual respect and service that transcended age, rank, and protocol. Their partnership in the rain was becoming a symbol of everything good about duty, compassion, and the bond between those who serve and those they protect. The storm was finally beginning to break. After nearly 5 hours of relentless rain and wind, the clouds were starting to thin, and occasional patches of lighter sky were visible between the dark masses overhead. Princess Charlotte had been standing with the umbrella for almost an hour now, her small arms aching but her determination unshaken. Both she and Thomas could sense that their ordeal was nearing its end. Thomas felt a profound mixture of relief and gratitude as he realized his shift change would be arriving soon. The combination of the princess's umbrella and the gradually improving weather meant that the worst of his physical discomfort was behind him. But more importantly, he had been given a gift that no amount of training could have prepared him for, a direct demonstration of the caring heart of the person he was sworn to protect. The crowd outside the castle gates had grown significantly despite the weather. Word of Princess Charlotte's gesture had spread across social media platforms, and people were calling it one of the most heartwarming displays of royal compassion in recent memory. Photographers and news crews had documented the entire scene, and the images were already being shared around the world. Inside the castle, senior members of the royal household had made a decision. Rather than forcing protocol that would separate the princess from her self-appointed mission, they chose to honor what she was doing while ensuring her safety. Additional umbrellas were brought out, and staff members quietly positioned themselves nearby to provide backup coverage and assistance if needed. Princess Charlotte's voice was getting hoarse from speaking over the wind and rain, but she continued her quiet conversation with Thomas. She told him about her favorite books, her pets, and her lessons with various tutors. She asked questions about being a guard, though she didn't expect answers, and she shared her thoughts about the importance of people who dedicate their lives to helping others. "My grandmother always says that being royal means being willing to serve others," Charlotte said, adjusting her grip on the umbrella handle. "I think that's what you do every day, and I think that's what I should do too, even if it's something small like holding an umbrella." Thomas felt his throat tighten with emotion at her words. The wisdom and compassion in her simple statement revealed a maturity far beyond her years. She understood something that many adults struggled to grasp, that true leadership comes from service, and that helping others, regardless of their position, was always the right thing to do. The relief guard was approaching across the courtyard, dressed in a fresh, dry uniform and carrying proper rain gear. Thomas could see him in his peripheral vision, walking carefully across the slippery cobblestones. The man's eyes widened as he took in the unusual scene of Princess Charlotte standing behind Thomas with the umbrella, both of them soaked but steadfast in their shared commitment. "I think your replacement is coming," Charlotte observed, noticing the approaching guard as well. "You've been so incredibly brave today. I hope you know that everyone in the castle has been watching you with admiration. You never gave up even when the storm was at its worst." The relief guard came to attention beside Thomas and executed a perfect formal exchange. As Thomas finally allowed himself to relax his rigid posture for the first time in over 5 hours, he felt every muscle in his body protest. His uniform was heavy with water, his boots squelched with every movement, and his hands were so stiff from the cold that he could barely move his fingers. Princess Charlotte lowered the umbrella as the exchange of guards was completed, and for the first time she and Thomas were able to look directly at each other. His face was pale and drawn from the ordeal, but his eyes showed profound gratitude. Her young face was flushed with cold and exhaustion, but her expression radiated satisfaction at having helped someone in need. "Thank you, Your Royal Highness," Thomas said quietly, his voice rough from hours of silent endurance. Protocol now allowed him to speak, and he wanted to express his appreciation properly. "Your kindness today meant more to me than I can possibly express. You showed me what true nobility really looks like." Charlotte smiled, suddenly looking very much like the 10-year-old child she was. "You're very welcome. I'm just glad I could help a little bit. You're a hero, you know, not just for standing in the rain, but for dedicating your life to keeping people safe." Staff members approached with warm coats and towels for both of them. The deputy master of the household personally escorted Princess Charlotte back into the castle, praising her compassion, while gently insisting that she needed to get into dry clothes immediately. Thomas was led to the guards' quarters where hot tea, soup, and medical attention were waiting. As they walked toward their respective destinations, both Thomas and Princess Charlotte kept looking back at each other. They had shared something special during those hours in the storm, a moment of pure human connection that transcended their different roles and stations in life. The guard and the princess had become partners in a display of mutual respect and service. The story of their encounter spread rapidly through news outlets and social media. Photos of the young princess holding an umbrella over the steadfast guard became iconic images that were shared millions of times. The pictures captured something beautiful about duty, compassion, and the idea that true leadership comes from caring for others. In the days that followed, Thomas received commendations from his superiors and recognition from the public for his dedication to duty. But the praise that meant the most to him came in the form of a handwritten note from Princess Charlotte, thanking him for his service and asking if he was feeling better after his long day in the rain. Princess Charlotte, meanwhile, became known for her spontaneous act of kindness. The umbrella incident became a defining moment that revealed her character to the world. Years later, people would still reference that rainy day as an example of her natural empathy and her understanding of what it truly means to serve others. The umbrella itself was quietly preserved by the palace staff, becoming an unofficial symbol of the day when protocol gave way to human kindness. Thomas returned to his regular duties, but he never forgot the lesson he learned about the heart of the young woman he was sworn to protect. And Princess Charlotte continued to grow up understanding that true royalty comes not from titles or ceremony, but from the willingness to help others, even if it means standing in the rain. The storm had passed, but the warmth of what happened during those difficult hours would last a lifetime for both of them.